righty then. That was a phenomenal panel. I think that we all learned an awful lot from that panel, and I know that this next panel is going to be just as amazing. And so I want to thank you again for coming back to your seats and for your attention. And I'd like to welcome back to the podium someone that is a very, very friendly and familiar face to many of us, and someone that's been doing an excellent job in navigating all of the different responsibilities that he has for the last couple of days. Please help me to welcome back to the Family Forum stage the Commander of the United States Army Installation Command and the Army's Assistant Chief of Staff for Installation Management, Lieutenant General Mike Farrader.
Well, good afternoon, and it is great to be with you and to see everyone here again. And this is our Surviving Families, New Beginnings, Surviving Families and Spouses and New Beginnings and New Strengths. And this afternoon, we have a great panel for you. As we begin, I just ask, are there any survivors, spouses, or family members in the audience? And would you please stand if you would? Well, thank you so much. And thank you for what you do every day and in the face of your own sorrow, providing comfort and support to others, and above all, making sure our fallen are not forgotten. And as we all know, we also have virtual observers and members joining us, and for those surviving spouses and families who are on the net, we also welcome and thank you. So I recently was honored to join our surviving spouse and families at Fort Sam Houston at Joint Base San Antonio, where we observed for Gold Star Mother's Day with an opening of our Remembrance Room at the Survivor Outreach Services Center and a special performance by the U.S. Army Soldier Show. What one mother said about her son exemplifies what we've heard many times, and it goes like this. It's been 6 years, and I have to remind myself that the reality is he's not returning. But the celebration of his life is more in the forefront now. And this coming to terms with a soldier's death is an ongoing process for our survivors, and one that evolves and changes. We know that the best way we can honor fallen soldiers is to support the surviving spouses and family members and the people they loved as they go through this process. Now, our senior leaders have made it clear that we will wrap our arms around our survivors. We will show them that they are not forgotten and that they will always be a part of our Army family. The critical question always is how? How do we turn the Army's rock-solid commitment to surviving families into day-to-day action on the ground? The answer begins with our Survivor Outreach Services, and this is a One Army program staffed by active and reserve and National Guard team members. And through the Survivor Outreach Services, we have a way to provide long-term services to support the survivors, regardless of component, closest to where they live, and as long as they desire. Our Survivor Outreach Support Coordinators and financial counselors are there to help survivors in a number of ways, including managing life and benefit milestones, developing financial plans, facilitating support groups, making referrals, and in many, many other ways. Also, during the last year, we've taken a number of issues on identified by the surviving spouses and their family members, and including feedback provided to General Odierno and Mrs. Odierno through the Survivor Advisory Group. And progress includes an ID card, a change to the Army regulation that allows our Gold Star family members, and our surviving family members unescorted access onto our Army installations. We mentioned yesterday just something as simple as parking signs in our PX and commissary and other buildings around our installations. And as we said there, it may be an empty parking spot, but the sign there tells all of our soldiers and all of our families the importance of the Gold Star recognition for our survivors and their family members. And then just, I think last week or the week before, this big work that everyone was doing, that our team was doing for stabilization for soldiers. For this enables soldiers who experience the death of a spouse to request stabilization up to 2 years. And so as they journey through this experience, that they're not suddenly receiving orders and having to be displaced. Now today's panel will start with Ms. Lisa Hallett, the co-founder and chief executive officer of Wear Blue and Run to Remember. And Lisa's husband, Captain John Hallett, was killed in Afghanistan on the 25th of August 2009. And she stayed in the Fort Lewis area and formed a running club. They all ran past me in the 10-miler, so we saw a lot of blue shirts going that way. She will share with us today how, through Run to Remember, she found a healthy way to move forward. Also, Ms. Kristen Santos Silva, whose husband, Sergeant First Class Santos Silva, was killed in Afghanistan on March 22nd, 2010. And Kristen will talk to us about her involvement in Fort Bragg's Survivor Outreach Program and the support that made a big difference for her as she confronted the question, what next? And what does my life look like now? And Ms. Kim Ruoko, Director of the TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program's Suicide Prevention Program, is with us. And Kim lost her husband, Marine Corps Major John Ruoko, to suicide in 2005. And she'll talk about suicide risk factors and reintegration and how TAPS and SOS work together towards suicide prevention. And then finally, Mr. J.C. Abney, our director from MCOM in the G9 program, and he'll talk about how surviving families' insights and inputs. With that, we've continued to enhance our program. And with that, thank you all for being here, and to Ms. Hallett.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's an honor to be a part of this forum this afternoon. I appreciate you sharing your time with me. My name is Lisa Hallett, and I'm the co-founder, along with Aaron O'Connor, of Wear Blue, Run to Remember. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about my life and how this chapter became a part of the Wear Blue, Run to Remember story. But before I tell you about Wear Blue, I'd like to show you. Next slide. Play. Next slide. The mission of Wear Blue, Run to Remember is to establish a running community that honors the service and sacrifice of the American military. We're a national nonprofit that builds free running communities outside of major military installations that act as a support network for our military members and their families, while linking our service members to local Gold Star families and communities. The organization's service project is to create a living memorial to our fallen heroes. Next slide. But the story of Wear Blue starts with the story of my husband, Captain John Hallett. John and I are both from the San Francisco Bay Area, and he chose to follow in his Uncle Charlie's footsteps and attend West Point. After 4 years at the academy that involved a lot of marching, scuba school, and water polo, John graduated in 2001 and began his Army career as an infantryman. We were married in 2003, and John deployed 3 weeks later with the 25th ID out of Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. After 14 months in Kirkuk, Iraq, he returned home, and we continued on to Fort Benning, Fort Polk, and finally Fort Lewis, Washington. Next slide. By the time we got to Washington, we had 2 young boys and a little girl on the way. And John took command of Alpha Company, the 117 Stryker Battalion, in November of 2008. John was a dedicated leader. He was passionate about the success, safety, and development of his soldiers. He and his company deployed with 5th Brigade in the middle of July 2009. 3 weeks later, on August 2nd, our daughter, Heidi Bai, was born. By the middle of August, I was ready to reconnect with the unit. So on August 25th, I attended a point of contact training. At this point, it was only 6 weeks into the deployment, so we were still learning the information flow. We weren't quite sure how information was getting disseminated. I was requested to the battalion classroom, and the tone was somber. 2 gentlemen were waiting for me at the classroom with a script. The Secretary of Defense regrets to inform you that your husband, Captain John Hallett, is believed to have perished. And I stopped listening. I hurried home to my children, and the general called that night, wondering what he could do to help. And I asked him, I said, they said believed. Is it true? And you could hear his deep pause. I'm so sorry, Lisa. John's not coming home. It is in this moment that I realize what I have learned is forever. Running is how I've always dealt with the challenges of military life. So the first thing I thought to do was to lace up my sneakers. 2 days after John died, I met with a good friend, and we pushed out on a run. I had just had a baby. It wasn't pretty. It was the slowest, ugliest run ever. But it was the first time I was able to connect with my grief. I needed to run in order to grieve. And I needed to gather with other people to know and remember that I wasn't alone. Running was a tangible accomplishment. It was something I could control in a world that felt out of control. I pounded the pavement in sorrow for all the dreams and love I had lost. I pounded the pavement for the fears I had for the future. And I pounded the pavement with the stress of raising 3 kids under 3 without the love, strength, and guidance of their father. Next slide. A small group of spouses from the battalion began to consistently run together. And with one another, we supported each other through our grief, our fears, and our solitude. And slowly, we realized that we were running through the challenges and stress of deployment, and we're forming our own support network. We were running to strength, hope, and confidence for the future. We met every Saturday morning, gathered in a small circle, called out the names of our brigade's fallen soldiers, and then pushed out on training runs for an upcoming local marathon. And the runs were happy. They were full of joy and life. And I realized that I had an entire military family running at my side. We were in this together. When the soldiers returned from deployment that summer, we realized that running with Blue was a good way for them to reintegrate with their community and their families. We found that the men and women of 5th Brigade needed a place to heal, reconnect with their spouses and children, move forward, and prepare for future deployments. And as the other units recognized the value 5th Brigade soldiers were receiving from Wear Blue, they began to join us. We realized a larger demand for an active support network for our military. Then, under the leadership of fellow runner and military spouse Erin O'Connor and myself, Wear Blue was born. Joint Base Lewis McChord became the first Wear Blue Run to Remember chapter. Next slide. Despite my personal loss, this is not a widows running group. Each of the groups that belong to our community, active duty military and their families, veterans, retired, Gold Stars, and supportive community members, come to Wear Blue with different challenges driving their footsteps. And yet we all come together with the same desire to honor both the service and the sacrifice of the American military. John was my world, but John was but one of 39 KIAs in his deployment. And those 39 lives are only a small fraction of the 6,627 lives that have been given in the global war on terror. There is no such thing as an easy deployment. Losses sustained during a deployment affect us all. We all feel responsibility for our Gold Stars, but we're not always sure how to show them. Wear Blue Run to Remember is how we can continue to support the family members of the fallen. Military life in general comes with unique challenges. This is a community where we can stand side by side, connecting with one another, call out the names of the fallen, and push out on a run with one another, so that we know we are not moving forward alone. Sometimes runners come to give strength, and sometimes they come to receive. Wear Blue Run to Remember is a diverse community, from relationship to the military to ability on the race course. Wear Blue is built around running, but an individual's journey to become an athlete begins with a single step. And on the other end of the spectrum, Wear Blue runners include dedicated professional athletes, Olympians such as Joan Benoit Samuelson, and professionals in the running world, such as Editor David Willey of Runner's World, Bart Gasso, Jeff Hollister, Jeff Galloway. Next slide. Wear Blue is the support network that so many of us didn't realize we were looking for. Slide.
Specialist Graham, he was kind of like a mentor to me. He was sort of in a leadership position when I came to the platoon, and we deployed together, and he was always real nice to me, which, you know, as anybody who's been a private, E1, E2, E3, knows that E4s, E5s, so on, aren't usually the nicest people to the new guys. So he was always real nice to me, so that's a good memory that I have of him. That's pretty much how I remember him, is always being the one guy that was always kept me even keeled. And I miss him. I miss him a lot.
The mission of Wear Blue Run to Remember is to establish a running community that serves as a living memorial to the service and sacrifice of the American military.
Captain John Hallett, Captain Corey Jenkins, Sergeant First Class Ronald Sawyer, Specialist Dennis Williams,
PFC Alan Newton, Captain Benjamin Sliver, PFC Brian Bates,
Specialist Joseph White, Sergeant Adam Ray, Specialist James Miller.
Come out here and do Run to Remember, it really sets it apart from just, you know, friends going elsewhere and, you know, never talking to them again. You can really remember them for what they did and, you know, the sacrifices they made. So it means a lot to me to come out here and run in their memory.
Next slide. Wear Blue creates running communities that support our military families. There's a lot of fantastic agencies out there that use running as a means to generate funds for amazing research. Running is the end state for Wear Blue. It is the support network. There's no registration fees. There's never any charges. We want it to be as easy as possible. Come and run with us and make your steps purposeful. It's not a future use effort. It's applicable today. It's instant rewards. Put on a blue shirt, and you belong to a network that truly understands and appreciates the service and sacrifice of the American military. Wear Blue brings all of the populations together. There's amazing support systems out for different aspects of our military community. Wear Blue brings them together. It's a way for our civilians to stand next to those serving and say thank you through their actions. It's the medium for a unit to run forward with a Gold Star mom. And it's a way for a soldier to connect with another soldier. No words are required. The presence indicates their shared experiences. We help ease the reintegration process. It's something that families can do together because it's accessible for all abilities. It's a healthy way for families to come together, and it helps soldiers engage in healthy coping mechanisms. And we're creating support networks for our family readiness groups. We're for the fallen, for the fighting, and for the families. While the spouse is deployed, we have a healthy place for families to come. Runs are without rank. We're sharing a connection to the military and a desire to run. We're unified in our blue shirts. Next slide. So, do we really work? I like to think that we do. Wear Blue boasts many success stories, from the soldiers of 117 to include Sergeant Diaz running for his friend Patrick Williamson, to Mike Brown, West Point class in 1966, who runs for his roommate who was killed in Vietnam. Major Ryan McCormick and his wife Erin wear blue together. Erin ran her first marathon in Seattle, while Ryan shadow ran his marathon in Afghanistan during his deployment. Wear Blue kept them connected. And Christy Buenaconti. Christy came to Wear Blue 4 days after her husband was killed in a helicopter training accident. We've created a place for our military families to come through the challenges of military life. Frequent moves, multiple deployments, loss, and separation. Wear Blue is an easy place to belong. Next slide. You know everyone is very excited to belong to Wear Blue. I can see it on your faces. So you want to know, how can you get involved? First step would be to join a Saturday run near you. We have chapters at Joint Base Lewis McChord and Fort Bragg, opening Veterans Day weekend. And if you don't live in an area with a chapter, until we can open a chapter in your area, post on our Facebook page, register on our website, and meet up with other Wear Blue runners in your area. And more chapters are coming soon. But Saturday runs are the crux of who we are and what we do. We gather, we run, we honor. Just purposeful steps. And there's never a charge. Every week a chapter comes together as a community. They meet a few minutes early and socialize. And then at 9 o'clock they circle. They bow their heads, remember the brave men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice, say their names, we honor, and then we run. We run to heal, to grieve, to cope, to find strength, to give strength, to celebrate the lives the heroes lived, and to show our pride in the continued service of the American military. Extended routes will be different lengths, but we'll always have a 3-mile distance, keeping it accessible for all abilities. And you can sprint it or walk it, but the courses will be marked with support stations on the way. But part of Wear Blue is creating an opportunity to train for endurance events, and we hope that you'll consider getting involved in one of our races. Next slide. So if you're going to do a Saturday run, find a local chapter and come when you need a good workout. Come when you want to get connected to a new community. Come when you're remembering a fallen friend. But it's not church. You don't have to come on Saturday every week or even ever. All you have to do to belong to Blue is to choose Blue. Put on a blue shirt and make your steps purposeful. If you're reaching for a dry fit, why not choose Blue? We've been a part of military runs. We have people running in blue around the world. FRG events, gym, mud runs, marathons, life, just take it in blue. Next slide. I would love for you to be a part of this weekend's Marine Corps Marathon with the Wear Blue community. Races are an opportunity to share our honor of service and sacrifice on a very large scale. So on Sunday, October 28th, Wear Blue is taking on the Marine Corps Marathon. And if you're registered for this run, I hope that you'll choose blue. And if you're local to the area, I hope that you'll volunteer for the Wear Blue Mile, in which we hold full-size flags honoring our fallen service members. You can register at our website. But Wear Blue volunteers are a vital part of our team. On Sunday, 5 days from now, we're going to have hundreds of runners and supporters wearing blue at the race. 30,000 runners are going to be touched in some way by our wave of blue. They're going to see our shirts and pass by our flags, and a seed will be planted. Our military members and our families sacrifice a great deal, and sometimes they sacrifice everything. That seed will grow. One day, 30,000 people won't be looking at blue, they'll be wearing blue. And they'll know that that blue shirt means they are running to honor the service and sacrifice of the American military. Next slide. But if you do live in the Joint Base Lewis McChord or Fort Bragg area, hope that you will consider joining us for a local Saturday run. But chapters will meet every Saturday morning at a consistent location near a military installation, and will provide the training, marked courses, and fuel on the way. Next slide. We're going nationwide, and we want this community to be on the front end of it. And we have supporters around the world, to include Olympian Joan Benoit Samuelson. We're proud to be a life-affirming force supporting America's military families. Next slide. Our gift to fallen service members is to remember them and to remember how profound their service was to this great nation. Together as a Wear Blue community, we celebrate the lives of these men and women. We respect those still in uniform. We support the military communities waiting back home, and we hold up those left behind. I look forward to running with you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's really wonderful for you to come and spend your afternoon listening to survivor stories. It's a topic that nobody wants to talk about, that nobody wants to think about, because as a military member, you know that one day it possibly could happen to you, and it's the fear of the unknown. What's even another issue that you don't want to think about is suicide loss, and unfortunately I lost my husband, Major John Ruaco, to suicide 7 years ago. It's my hope today that I can tell you a little bit about what happened to our family, what happened to my husband, but also what is really important to know about suicide survivors. How do we help those left behind? How do we give them the best care? How do we keep those families from falling apart under this loss, or reclusing themselves, or becoming sicker themselves? So I'm going to start with talking about my husband a little bit. This picture of him here is the day he actually came back from Iraq, where we met him at the airport and greeted him. Those are my two sons, Joey and Billy. Joey's the older one, and Billy is the younger one. They were 8 and 10 at the time. My husband was a very accomplished Marine. He was a helicopter pilot. He flew attack helicopters. He flew Cobras. He had 3 deployments. But he also had a history of unresolved trauma and untreated depression. He came into the Marine Corps wanting to be something good, wanting to give back, wanting to do something important, wanting to be somebody his parents could be proud of, his 3 brothers could be proud of, his uncles could be proud of. He tried really hard and worked really hard. He graduated #1 in his class in flight school. Our first station was in North Carolina, New River Air Station. He was a Cobra pilot. He was young and excited and motivated and very good at what he did. And unfortunately, during that time, in the early 90s, if anybody was stationed there at the time, there was a lot of mishaps. Mishaps is the word they use when there's an accident in the aviation community. He lost a lot of friends during that time. We went to the officers club one evening, and there was actually a table of 8 widows. And I remember thinking, oh, God, please don't let that happen to me. And I did. I feared that every year, that he would crash in his helicopter or he'd be shot down. I never for one moment thought that he would die the way that he did. Those deaths, every single one of those at that duty station, he took to heart. He worried about making a mistake that would cause another Marine to die. He worried about crashing and leaving his family behind. The last incident that happened out there, it was real close friends of him that had a midair collision, and he lost 4 of his closest friends. He was at the scene and had to identify the bodies. He came back to the base and saw the widows there and tried to comfort them. But when he came home, he crashed. He literally crashed himself emotionally. He had severe flashbacks of the incident. He would wake up with night sweats. He had nightmares. He had difficulty functioning. He was unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to run, unable to lift. As a military spouse, I was extremely worried about him, but I was really afraid of making things worse for him by telling somebody. among the military spouses, there's really an unwritten code that we don't talk outside of our home if there's something going on there that might affect his career. We want to protect him no matter what, and we want the best for them, and we don't want to make things worse by maybe telling somebody something that could be held against him. And he said to me many times, wow, if they know how bad I am, they're never going to let me fly. They'll take away my wings. He did start to get concerned about his ability to fly, and we started to talk about that. And finally, we went to a major who he trusted in the squadron. We told him how much pain he was in and about his struggle, and that it was now affecting his ability to fly. And the major said to us, you know, this happens to everybody at some point. Take some time off, but don't tell anybody about it. Don't go on medication. Don't go to counseling. Don't tell anybody. Just work your way through it. We went back to our home. He took a month or two off, and he slowly willed himself out of the bed and out of the fetal position into walking and then running and finally lifting, and finally his head cleared. He pulled out every piece of resilience that he could. He said to me, I'm so weak, I'm so sorry that I did this to you. He felt like his depression and his post-traumatic stress was his fault. It was a character flaw in him, a weakness in him. He didn't relate it at all to being injured psychologically from the trauma he'd been exposed to. He thought that if he was stronger, if he had more tools, if he had more ability to pull himself up by his bootstraps, he would not have had this happen. When he finally got well, he said to me, you know what, I'm so sorry, I'll never do that to you again. I will never do that to you again. We had a new baby at the time. Our first son, Joey, was only about 3 months old. And John said to me, you know, please don't ever tell Joey that I did this. I'd be so embarrassed to know him to know that when he was a child, I couldn't get out of bed and hold him, that I couldn't run with him. We went forward, and he actually did really well. For the next 8 or 10 years, he was successful. He deployed right after that. He had a lot of physical injuries after that he obtained, that he also hid. When he went to Bosnia, he was on the flight deck of the aircraft carrier, and he was blown over when he was trying to climb into his Cobra, and he broke his wrist. I didn't want anybody to know because he didn't want to be pulled off the mission, and he knew people trusted him, and he was leading them, so he pulled out his duct tape, and he duct taped up his wrist, and he went through the mission. He later tore his Achilles playing rugby, playing against Ireland on a deployment. He tore a chest muscle once in a dancing incident, and anyone wants that story, I'll tell you later. But the point is that he walked around with a lot of physical pain and a lot of emotional pain, all of which he hid because he didn't want to be seen as weak. Finally, you know, over the years, those things started to wear on him. Our last place of duty was at Vance Air Force Base in Enid. We had started to talk about getting out of the military and him flying for the commercial airlines because, frankly, the job was exhausting him, and physically and emotionally he was strained. But as we started to transition, 9/11 happened. And as most of you know, that changed the course of your life. So many survivors we talk to and we look back and we say, wow, our whole lives shifted on that day. And for us, it definitely did. I remember him looking at me and saying, you know, this is going to change everything. I didn't really know exactly what he meant when he said that, but looking back, I do, because he was trying to figure out how to please everybody and not let anybody down. He didn't want to let the Air Force down that he was doing an exchange with, training young pilots. He didn't want to let down his Cobra community that he was so good in. He didn't want to let his family down, who he had promised to move back to Boston. So he tried to do everything. He joined the reserves. He attached to a unit that was deploying. He continued to train on the 737 with the Southwest Airlines. He moved us to Boston, and he tried to do everything. He finally deployed in 2004 with a reserve unit, and it was the Battle of Fallujah. He flew 75 combat missions and got medals for it. He was amazing. He did a great job. But when he came back, it all fell apart. All that trauma, all that loss, all that physical pain that he had been holding down was okay whenever the adrenaline war was going, but when he came home and that adrenaline stopped and he was facing life again, he had trouble functioning. He came home, he was different. He was gaunt, he was impatient, he had lost weight, he had outbursts with the kids, angry outbursts, he had difficulty sleeping, all the things that he used to find so much joy in, like his favorite meal, his friends, his family, he no longer wanted to be a part of. He withdrew from all the things and the people that he used to care about. And as a military spouse, I started saying to him, you know what, we need to get help. My fear was that, first of all, I didn't know where to start to go get help. Second of all, what were they going to do to him when they did take him to get help? And third, would it work? Would this help work? We started talking about getting help, and he was still resistant. He said to me, you know, if I go get help, people are going to think I'm weak. They're going to think I don't want to deploy again. He was scheduled to redeploy in March, and this was November. He said they're going to think I just don't want to go. Who's going to lead them if I can't go? Right there, when you think about what he was saying there, that is really the definition of stigma. If you look it up, one of the best definitions I've ever heard is a change in the way people view you. And what is more important to our military men and women than how people view you? They're trusting you with their life. He was afraid that seeking behavioral health care would change the way people viewed him in a very bad way. He once said an analogy. He said, you know what, when I walk into the ready room, people look and they go, oh yeah, that's Rocco. He's WTI trained. He's been into combat. He's got air medals. He said, you know what they'll say after I go to behavioral health? There's Rocco. He went to behavioral health. He's depressed. He has post-traumatic stress. That's how we used to say it. The night John died, he was in California, I was in Massachusetts, and it was Super Bowl Sunday. The Patriots were in the Super Bowl. That's our team. That's his team. All day long, I couldn't get a hold of him. The kids couldn't get a hold of him. And when we won, my boys wanted to talk to him so bad, and we kept calling and couldn't get a hold of him. And they finally did get a hold of him, and he answered the phone, and my son Joey, who was 10 at the time, started to tell him about the game, and I could see the change in his face. And he said, he handed me the phone, and he said, Mom, Dad didn't watch the game, and he's crying. And I told him that it was going to be okay, that I would take care of it, and I took the phone. And John hadn't watched the game. He said that he had just sat in the room thinking about what a mess he had made of his life, how he wasn't strong enough to pull his act together, that he should be able to pull himself out of this, that it's his fault that he was depressed, it's his fault that he was traumatized, and that if he was stronger, he wouldn't be in this situation. I had a master's degree in social work at the time, so I had had a lot of clinical training about depression and suicide. It didn't really fit the things that I had heard in school, like he wasn't giving away his possessions. He was making plans for the future. He hadn't had like this long history of depression. He didn't have suicide in the family. But I asked him the questions. I said, John, are you feeling so badly that you could kill yourself? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? And he said to me, I could never do that to you and the boys. I would never do that to you and the boys. After we hung up the phone, he said, I'm going to go get help, but this is going to be the end of everything for me and for us. No one's going to trust me anymore. No one's going to follow me anymore. It'll be the end of everything. I begged him to go, and he promised me he would. And when I hung up that phone, I was so worried about him because I knew going to behavioral health would be the hardest thing he ever did in his life. And even though he was supposed to come back on that Thursday to be with the family, I went to the Logan Airport, I jumped on the red eye, and I flew out to California. And when I landed that next morning, I started to make phone calls, and I called the clinic, I called his unit, and he wasn't anywhere, and I knew that I was too late. I drove to his hotel room, and I'm going to tell you the details of just this because this will lead right into postvention and what we do for what's important to do for suicide survivors. Is I drove to that hotel room, and there was cars kind of haphazardly parked there, and I knew they were there because of John. They had Marine Corps stickers on the back of the cars and all. And I went into the office of that hotel room, and because I didn't know where his room was, and there was a man behind the desk, and he was scrambling, and he was on the phone, and he was saying, "I don't know what to do. We've never had this happen before." And I said to him, "It's my husband. I know it's my husband. What room is he in? Where's my husband? I know it's him." And the man looked at me, and he put the phone down, and he backed up really slowly, went in another door, and shut the door and locked it. The shame and about suicide and the ability to not even know what to say to me, instead he said nothing. I went to the hall and started calling for people to help me, and a nice little Hispanic maid took my hand and brought me up the stairs. And there was a Marine coming out of the room crying, and they had found my husband. They took me to a room because suicide is a crime scene. They took me into a room. They brought a detective, a priest, and a trauma specialist, and they began asking me questions. The detective was asking me if he had had an affair. Was he a gambler? Was he a drinker? What did he have? Was he into pornography? Was he, and my main concern was, what do I tell my boys? What do you tell two little boys, 8 and 10 years old, that their dad made it safely back from Iraq but then took his own life? So I was asking, and the priest looked at me, and he said, "You know what the Catholic Church thinks about suicide?" And I said, "Actually, I don't. I grew up Protestant." And he said that it's a sin. And I said, are you telling me that I should tell my sons that he's not only dead, but he's in hell? Is that what you're telling me? I've since found out that that's not true at all, that that's an old school belief, and that's no longer true. And I just happened to get that priest that was still sticking with those old thoughts. And that's still very prevalent in our country today. Our survivors of suicide hear that a lot. The trauma specialist told me that my children were too young to hear that it was suicide, that I should tell them that he had an accident. So from that hotel room, I called my kids and I told my sister to tell them that John had had an accident. I got on the plane to fly home, and I thought, wow, what a mess. Now I can't take the kids to the church for fear they're told that it's a sin. I've told my kids a lie, and now I got to make sure no one else says the word, or he doesn't overhear, or they don't read it in the newspaper, or no one at school tells them. And I knew that that was all wrong. I went home, and that next weekend was Joey's 11th birthday, and we had already planned a party at Chuck E. Cheese's with 15 11-year-olds. Now that's hell after. So I was propped up in a chair at the party, and on the way home from that party, we were driving on the highway, and Joey said to me, "You know, Mom, I think I killed Dad." And I said, "What do you mean, honey?" And he said, "Well, when Dad was home at Christmas, we were having nachos, and I said, 'Dad, can I put some salt on the nachos?' And he said, 'No, honey, because it's not good for your heart to have too much salt.' He said, 'You know, when Dad wasn't looking, I salted the nachos.' And I think he must have had a heart attack and had an accident." If kids aren't told the truth, they'll make it about themselves, and the story will be much worse than the real truth. I learned a lot from there on, and I decided that I had to take control of this loss, that I had to start from scratch, that we were like the phoenix burned to the ground, and that we had to repair on honesty and truth. I called TAPS late at night, I think it was midnight, and Bonnie Carroll actually answered the phone. And I said, I don't know if this is the right place to call because my husband died by suicide. He wasn't killed in action, but I need help. And she said, we can help you. I went to TAPS, mostly for my kids. We showed up there, and there was therapy dogs there. My youngest son immediately scrambled under a table with another kid, and I heard my son say, my dad died. And the other kid said, my dad died too. And then my son said, good, want to play football? And I thought, well, we're in the right place. I went to that seminar that weekend, and although I got some support around my grief, I also realized that suicide loss was a lot different, that there was lots of challenges around shame and spirituality and how to tell children and how to negotiate your community and how to answer those questions that people ask you and how to deal with the trauma, how to deal with the guilt of not saving them, how to deal with protecting your family, because families of suicide loss are 5 times more likely to die by suicide. The word postvention has developed out of that, and it means to care for families after suicide loss so that you can prevent more suicides within that family so that you could break that cycle. Bonnie and I started to make a program specifically for suicide. Getting survivors to us, to care, right after their loss is incredibly important to help them set that grief course in a healthy direction, to help them answer those immediate questions about spirituality and how to talk to your kids and how to heal and how to protect and how to stop the cycle. We now have memorandums of agreement with most of the services where we get those suicide losses within days of the suicide. We're able to reach out to them, assess their needs, assess their risks, and get their services set up. We're able to set them up with another peer who's had a very similar loss. We just, had a survivor call who was pregnant when her husband killed himself. We were able to connect her with another spouse who was pregnant when her husband killed himself. The older spouse who was trained by us to be a peer mentor was actually able to go to that birth, be there with that widow, and help her with all the questions and all that was before her about how to talk to her child, how to get through this, and how to go on. We have survivors of suicide who are now working with the whole population of other survivors. We have one right now who works in the SOS office out at Fort Carson. And we're able to work really closely with the SOS office there in making sure survivors get to us early. They come into the office, and the SOS and TAPS partner together to run support groups at that office. They work together to make sure that survivors know about SOS and TAPS right away. We make sure that they are not alienating themselves and reclusing themselves. We have national, regional, and specifically suicide survivor seminars. 2 weeks ago, we had our biggest one ever out in San Diego. We had almost 400 adults and 150 children in a grief camp. All survivors of military suicide. Unfortunately and fortunately, I have 3,000 survivors of suicide in our data bank now. They need so much care, and the sooner you can get people who have a suicide loss of their families to support through SOS or through TAPS, the better off they're going to be, and the better their family's going to heal, and the more protection you're going to give them around having another suicide within their family. I'll end with just a couple good stories. The first year that my son went to TAPS, the 8-year-old, Billy, he always felt like his dad had kind of left him. He felt a little abandoned, as suicide will do to kids, because, let's face it, kids are always going to think that their parent chose to leave them when they die by suicide. No matter what you tell them about the suicidal mind or being sick, they still will feel that in some way their parent chose to leave them. My son went to TAPS waiting for his mentor, and his regular mentor didn't show up. But then this other guy came along. He was a Marine, and he came around the corner and he said to my son, "Are you Billy Ruwako?" And he said, "Yes, I am." "Who are you?" And he said, "You're not going to believe this, kid, but I came back from Iraq. I Googled military kids and camps because I wanted to give back. Because God knows our service members don't do enough, right? They have to go volunteer on their Memorial Day weekends." And he found TAPS. He flew on his own dime from Ohio to Washington, D.C. He said, "I got the training in how to mentor children. I looked on the list and I saw your name, and I said, 'Is this John Ruwako's kid?' And they said, 'Yeah, it is.' They said, he said, 'Can I have him?' And they said, 'Actually, yeah, his mentor didn't show up.' He sat down in front of my son and he said, 'You're not going to believe this, kid, but I flew with your dad in Iraq.' We flew about 60 missions together. I'm also a helicopter pilot. On one of the missions, we came under fire, and I panicked, and I was having trouble flying. And your dad took his helicopter, and he put it in between me and the oncoming fire, and he talked me back to base. And now I'm going to do that for you. Now I'm here for you." That was 6 years ago, and I can tell you that last weekend, at Friday Night Lights, the football game, my other son is the captain of the football team. He's the all-state linebacker, all 5'7", 150 pounds of him. And I was sitting in the stands with that Marine, that mentor. And he looked at me and he said, "This is so strange, because when I was in Iraq, John talked to me about dreaming about his sons playing football. And he couldn't wait for Friday Night Lights, and he couldn't wait to have his son play football. And Matt said to me, 'You know, I never in my life did I think that I would be here watching the game and that he wasn't.' And it's bittersweet, because there is somebody there for him. And he was cheering him on, and he was giving those pointers afterwards, the good and the bad, because I can only give the good, you know how moms are. And so life goes on, and there is hope and healing, but we have to provide that for survivors. We have to give them the support, and we have to give it to them right away, as soon as we possibly can. Because they can get better, they can go on to live productive, happy lives, but we have to give them the support in the beginning. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Santos-Silva, a post-9/11 widow to Sergeant First Class Carlos M. Santos Silva, United States Army, and killed in action March 22, 2010 by a roadside IED. I am very humbled and honored to have been asked to speak on behalf of the Survivor Outreach Program for the Military Family Survivors Forum here at the AUSA Symposium. Thank you for your attendance and participation in support of survivors, and to Lieutenant General Ferreter for our facilitator. As the panel is speaking and sharing different personal stories about new beginnings and new strengths, I would like to share about my involvement with Survivor Outreach Services. In 1997, I left the United States Army Reserve Component and began active duty service at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. It was there that I met my husband Carlos and had 12 wonderful years of marriage with my soldier. We began leading a dual active duty lifestyle within the military service and shortly later welcomed our son Cameron to our military lifestyle. From 1998 to 2009, we lived within 4 military posts. The last military post that we were together as a family was Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We moved to North Carolina in February of 2009. Carlos was assigned to 4th Brigade, Charlie Company of the 2nd Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Here, I became the Family Readiness Group Leader for Charlie Company, March 17, 2009, and would serve in this position until March 22, 2010, when I became a Gold Star wife. Carlos's unit deployed during the months of August and September of 2009. 1 month later, on November 22, 2009, as the FRG leader, I was notified that 2 soldiers had become KIA while serving on a mission by a roadside IED within our company. This is how I learned about Survivor Outreach Services. I contacted the SOS office at Fort Bragg to gain more information about the services so that I could share this with the new widow and her children. When she was ready, she went to SOS and they took her fully under their wing to start the transition process from being a Blue Star spouse to a Gold Star spouse. In learning about SOS, I gained information about the services and how they assisted in the transition of the days and the years ahead after a major life change. I then went and briefed Charlie Company of these services and the chance that somebody else would need these services. It then so happened that I would come to use SOS. In being notified March 22nd that my husband Carlos became KIA while serving on his 4th deployment with close to 14 years in the Army, my life changed upside down. I found myself lost and wondering, how am I going to provide for my son? How am I going to survive? Numerous thoughts fled through you upon a death notification. I was living on a military base when my husband became KIA. I knew that I would have to eventually move, settle down somewhere, go back to work, go back to school. I had to start wrapping my mind around what happened. A lot of survivors are asked, and then